the 9 knowledge areas of the PMBOK, then I think the slide is coming onto your screen. Yeah. So if you look at that, then all these can be mapped onto these 9 knowledge areas in terms of whether it's integration management. Okay, the issue is in terms of silo approach is a challenge. Each department within the same state government is trying to work independently. There's no common architecture. We talk about enterprise architecture in the private sector, but here we lack that particular spirit. Okay, and scope management, of course, that's a major challenge we have been talking about. Time management, we talked about it. Okay. HR, the turnover of the key person getting transferred, that is quite frequent, and inadequate resources who understand project management, who have the knowledge and skills to understand and take and apply project management techniques in e-government is very, very scarce. Quality approach to the quality management, that is lacking. Cost management, delays in payment becomes a concern in these initiatives. If payments are not made in time, how do we move to the next phase of the project? Communications, we are in government, we have too many meetings and too few decisions. How do we address this component? And the risk, yes, want to transfer all the risk to the private sector. So one-sided contract, that is there. And procurement in terms of management, in terms of vagueness and specifying what we really want. So very clearly, if you look at the challenges which we were talking of in e-governance, they are not really different, and they can very easily be mapped onto the your 9 knowledge areas. And ultimately, what really accounts for, if you look at all these are risks, and I was looking at yesterday's webinar on risk management, it becomes very, very critical. In fact, more than any other project. Okay, and ultimately it boils down to e-governance delayed is e-governance denied. Okay, so this is very, very important. Otherwise, we ultimately land up into lots and lots of funding, lots of resources being spent, but no outcomes, no benefit to the citizens or the stakeholders. Now I'll take you from here to the US, the learnings, which are, I think, are equally interesting. And over there also, there's no difference in terms of what we are talking and what they are talking in terms of challenges. And this was in 2010 when Vivek Kundra became the US government CIO, and they consolidated and did an intro inspection and found that despite spending more than 600 billion on IT over the past decades, the federal government has achieved little improvements or no productivity improvements at all. And the challenges, issues were the same, what we find here also in our Indian context. IT budget projects run over budget, behind schedule, or fail to deliver the promised functionality. Okay. Second is also interesting. How do you break up the whole project into small chunks? The WBS process, what we normally talk about in project management, rather than waiting for the whole thing to get implemented. How do you break it into small and get quick wins? Okay, how to make the people comfortable? Okay, that's what they were talking of. And of course, federal government too often relies on large custom proprietary, so or shared services exist. So that these are the typicals which came up. And so what was the implementation approach which was recommended as a part of this? Okay. Moving to the next slide. Now they said that they took a very clear call at the federal level. They said only projects, the IT program which follow these norms will be approved. Okay. Number one was have a dedicated program manager right from the beginning, and a fully staffed integrated project team. Okay, so if you are implementing number of projects in the same department or across the state government, so how do you bring in an integrated project team? Use a modular approach with the usable functionality delivered every 6 months. So the citizens would be very happy to see something coming out in 6 months, and if some corrective action has to be taken, so those mid-course corrections can be taken easily rather than waiting for 2 years' time. Use specialized IT acquisition professionals. Okay, so you have to use people who are specialized experts from the market. Okay, and drive towards a more balanced set of project and program success matrices. Okay, and holistic outcomes. And then they were also talking about, next slide, strengthen program and project management. Okay, the people managing these programs must represent. Okay, this is a very important line. What goes into their recommendation. The people managing these programs must represent the best of the best, not begin a new program unless the right manager is in place and dedicated to lead it. Okay. And this last is quite interesting in terms of what I'm putting up as its tech stack. That's a wonderful thing which happened. It's the IT dashboard which allows the American people to monitor the cost, schedule, and the CIO rating of every major IT investment in the federal government. And this is something which really maybe sometimes force the government itself to perform better. Okay, so these are some of the learnings which are very much relevant to us also in India when we are looking at managing e-governance project. Okay. Then we move on to the next slide where we are looking at what needs to be done. Okay. So what needs to be done? Develop the required capacities in program management and project management within the government and the private sector. Now the major challenge here is the private sector has competencies in project and program management, but there is a lack of domain knowledge understanding in terms of how the government functions. So there has to be a marriage between these two set of knowledge people within the government and the private sector. And then you bring in the best of the breed in terms of the people who understand both these elements. And somehow it can happen when we really build up these capacities within the government primarily rather than just outside the government. Okay. The next slide shows the type of capacities which are required at different levels in terms of the government especially. We are looking at the leadership level, that is at a political level, or it could be at a policy level, okay, and program level and the project level. So there are different level of competencies which one would require in terms of knowledge and skills and the attitudinal part as we move in different layers. It's not that only leadership will drive the project. You have to have capacities at each of these three layers: the leadership level, the program level, and the project level. Okay. So some of the good practices which are very much important and relevant to us in the Indian context. The first and foremost which comes about is establish the project management office, and sometimes we call it as a PMU. In India, normally we call it as a PMU during the early stages of the project planning. And what should be the type of consortium team structure for this? Next slide shows you as an illustration. Yeah, so it has to be a composite team where you have the domain people, the government people, and the experts dovetail together as a PMO, and you have the empowered committee which is basically to look at the decision-making strategy level, and you have the system integrator or the private partner who helps in the implementation. So the PMO formation itself becomes very, very important, and this is where the ownership of the government really drives the project rather than the consultant coming in and driving the project. So once you transfer the ownership back to the government, the chances for project management moving in a better, efficient way, they are much higher as compared to not having a composite team. Okay. And then there's some of the more recommendations which working at the national level. We are looking at developing a customized and a shared project management framework and tools for e-governance. We do have the PM book. It talks about a very detailed processes and methodology to address various challenges and components in the project life cycle. But in e-governance, we have to look at, when we're talking of e-governance, project management framework, we have to consider the administrative political leadership and government organizational culture, which are some of the fundamental shift and needs to be incorporated in the project management framework. So we'll have to do this customization and then build up a framework which can be used across the country. Okay. Then we are talking about project tracking tool, okay, to be integrated to the task and activities of the projects instead of having review meetings or maybe coming out with noting sheets in the government, because in government we are very fond of we have to submit everything on paper. But how can you make the tracking tool as your review mechanism even at the top level, whether it's happening at the ministerial level, political level, or at the bureaucracy level, along with the project management team. Okay, and ultimately develop motivated team leaders as nuclei for e-governance initiatives in the country. And for this, we require extensive awareness and training to be imparted across various levels. If you give project management training to only one particular level within the PMO, the other people will not really appreciate, because in government we want the cycle time to move very fast. We want the results to move fast, and we don't want a lot of times we want to skip the methodology, we want to skip the tools and move fast, jump. Okay, so you have to create awareness at all levels related to what we are really talking about as project management as a professional body. Okay, so in view of the increased focus on judicious spending of government finances, decreased availability of public sector funding for such programs, it is imperative that projects are properly planned, executed, controlled, and managed so as to get the desired results in a desired time frame. And for this, definitely, again and again, whether it's the Indian context or the US context or other countries' context, project management is one of the key to really make and deliver better and more efficient e-governance